folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Today, we're going to talk about, the music kind of sets up the tone. If you recognize it, this is from Mozart's Requiem Mass. Mozart was a very religious Catholic and representative of the faith of, only a few hundred years ago that prevailed among Catholics of the day. And I thought that would be a good background for the topic of the day. We're going to call this talk, What Catholicism Gets Right. I think, one of the trends I've noticed, I don't know if you have too, is many people turning back towards Christianity, and in particular, turning towards Catholicism as an appealing comfort in these times that we're going through, which everyone who has much sensitivity of such things realizes is a time of spiritual warfare. There seems to be a battle raging that the forces of good seem to be losing. Okay, so before we delve into that, I just want to give you a little bit of preface on the background art that I've got. You'll recognize this as some more computer-generated art. I always like to give you four choices of what it made, and I think this one actually is one of the better ones the computer has come up with. Now, to give you some background on what this is, I gave it the text prompt, a Lilithian possession victim, and gave it as a starting image. I'm going to switch over to another screen here. An image that you will recognize from Hollywood as a classic still from the movie The Exorcist. So I think it's quite instructive to see what the computer did, adding a Lilithian spin to a movie that is very much written in the Catholic vein of possession. Which I'm going to say is a start, but actually not getting to the root of the problem. There is a much more dangerous force of evil out there than, quote, the devil or Satan, which is this entity I call Lilith. Okay, so back to the theme. I actually love these images. I mean, this is, like a nasty little golemish creature, which represents one spin of the Lilithians that I see online, of people that basically get their ego feed from criticizing and attacking others who basically state any opinion that they want to suppress and cancel. That is this image there to me. This is the possessed person who is addicted to social media and has a very poor self-opinion, is constantly looking for reinforcement and support online, which is definitely a piece of the demonic influence of social media that is affecting many of our young, especially young girls. Also like that this one is sort of a unisex character, which kind of matches another part of the demonic agenda right now of trying to destroy the boundary, the identity, the sexual identity of individuals and mobilize them in fake identity narratives that sort of encourage them to be activists for groups that want to speak for them, that want to tell them what to do, what to think, etc., etc. This is characteristic of Lilithian entities. And this one, I think, definitely exudes this really toxic person that's gone down more of a satanic route of pure evil, of wanting to do others harm, thinking that doing harm to others is actually serving your cause. And this one here, I think, evokes an idea that there are definitely extra-human forces involved here, aliens, multidimensional entities, etc., which is in fact a part of the story. Okay, so let's talk about what Catholicism, and I think, if you're not willing to go out on a limb and accept what I teach you on this channel, you may at least go as far as Catholicism, which I actually think in its some of its fundamental teachings is a step in the right direction versus many other branches of Christianity, especially those sort of New Age branches of Christianity that preach universal, unconditional love and I believe in Jesus' sin forgiveness, and I let Jesus lead me. This is actually a Lilithian agenda. If you turn over control of your life to some voice that says they're Jesus or Mother Mary or whatever, you are at risk of being controlled by a demonic entity. And I think we have seen, most people have seen within their churches, people being overtaken by such control and mobilized in support of what we are finding out are very dark agendas by the world's elite and powerful, who absolutely do have secret societies where they engage in satanic practices, and they use those practices and other immoral and amoral initiation rites to ensure the loyalty of the people they pull into their confidence to execute these psyops and economic ops and military ops that are basically in the process of depopulating the human race, and I believe trying to turn us into a hive mind species, which is exactly what Lilithian entities have been working on ever since this planet was created, and even before. That is essentially the work of the adversary. They don't want you to have free will. They don't want you to have consciousness and a conscience. They want to tell you what to think, how to think it, what to do all the time. Basically turn you into a worker drone, a sex drone, or a security drone. And I think we see those effects definitely going on in communist China, where they have been executing the testing and implementation of these initiatives on the poor Chinese people behind this great firewall that projects China as this wonderful place where they're doing everything right. How many times have you heard that? Well, oh gosh, China can do anything because they don't have to get a permit or vote on something. They just do what they know is right. How many idiots have you heard saying that and saying that, oh, China's got things right. We need communism. We need socialism. Basically, you've got entire newspapers, major newspapers like the New York Times, who have become communist rags, Marxist rags. They have publicly published articles saying, basically statement articles from the editorial board of the New York Times that say they are Marxist. They believe that's a good idea. That is a satanic psyop on this species. And I think people are coming to realize that. So, Catholicism. If you're turning to that, here are some of the things that I think are really good points of Catholicism. The Catholic faith has this tradition of saints. And most people who are Catholics, at least old school Catholics, have certain patron saints that they look to for guidance. They don't view those saints as all powerful, but they view them as an intercessor, an intermediate, to get the assistance of higher order powers within the Catholic belief system. So rather than appealing directly to Jesus, you might go through the Mother Mary, Saint Mary. You might go through Saint Michael. You might have any of a number of patron saints. And in fact, the Catholic Church tried to have a patron saint for every day so that your birthday could sort of signal a saint that would be particularly interested in your welfare. This is actually a pretty decent idea and does a fairly good approximation to how spiritual guidance actually works. Okay, because God is not all-powerful, all-seeing, all-knowing, all-anything. If God was that, God would be a tyrant. God would be all-powerful, and we know that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And as above, so below. If that was God, you'd be worshiping the adversary. That's what God's enemy is all about. That's what the Lilithian entities are all about. Now, those who aren't familiar with who Lilith is, because they're Bible worshipers or whatever, and in the Bible, Lilith is reduced to a very minor character as Adam's first wife. You have to dig into other traditions, older traditions from the Sumerians and the Babylonians and so forth, to find out who Lilith is and how she has manifested as these troubled goddesses who do dark things, or as gods who do questionable things, because Lilith is a hermaphrodite, neither male or female, though this hermaphrodite likes to manifest as females and likes to work on females, because the female archetype started as a Lilithian archetype. This is the kind of dark truth behind the Adam's rib story. Remember, supposedly the first female was created from Adam's rib. Well, the word for rib is actually the same word as the name of one of these manifestations of Lilith. And the first sexual species was created by the combining of genetic material from a Lilithian species, a hive mind species. It was actually a kind of a doggish species. They were pack animals, and they communicate. If you notice how wolves work, they seem to have sort of a communication system, soundless communication system. They can look at each other and communicate thoughts. And the leader of the pack has this almost supernatural control over the others. That's why wolves have such a particular mystique in our mythology and history. Also why there are tales of werewolves. There are other species that have similar characteristics. Bats, for instance, seem to have this sixth sense and somehow know to go in the same direction, to all join in a group when there doesn't seem to be any particular reason for them to do that. To some extent, birds do that. They have flocking that seems to identify a leader, and the others follow in formation. There are definitely strongly hive-minded species like bees and ants that their Lilithian nature, beastly nature, is very evident. They have these queens, ants or bees, that lie in their nest, hive, and get served by all of the other bees. And this queen selectively reproduces to make different specialists, drones to serve and to go find food and bring it back to the queen, to go fight battles for the queen, to serve as the queen's entourage. So these hierarchies are spiritual hierarchies. They're mind control. What you do with your mind is spirit. Okay, that is spiritual energy, is mental energy, consciousness. So this idea of saints is very cogent, because if you raise your consciousness in a positive way, which means that you are attuned to the karmic nature of a soul's existence, and each incarnation shapes your soul and moves it toward maturing as either a karmically positive entity or a karmically negative entity. This is how souls grow to become saints, if you will, minor gods, because really there's not any difference between God and any other soul except for experience and the power that comes from concentrated spiritual energy. And that concentration of spiritual energy can come two ways. It can come through mind control and manipulation. That is a Lilithian way of concentrating energy. Or it can come through persuasion, law, and obedience to a leader. This is kind of the Luciferian way. Now, this then gives you the idea that there may be a lot more saints out there and anti-saints than one might gather. Some of the saints of the Catholic Church were elevated to sainthood for doing some pretty dark and negative things. Some are rather ambiguous in their accomplishments. Saint Joan of Arc is certainly a very, very valued and respected saint of French Catholics, but might be thought of as a demon by English Catholics, and was at the time, or might be thought of as a questionable saint by those who are not French. But in fact, that's kind of the nature of the beast. If you look at the honest history of Catholicism, some of its ideas have been used for good and some used for bad. I don't think there's any arguing that much of what happened as a result of the desire to persecute heretics, to wipe out heresies, to wipe out or convert anyone who didn't believe in Catholicism, was very negative. I don't think even most Catholics would argue that that was not the case. But much was positive. And if you understand that we've been involved in a testing here, that creation was not perfect after 6 days. It was very imperfect. And what was most imperfect about it was the way that creation was governed. It was governed by rigid pyramidal system where power was essentially absolute. And that wasn't working. That was very dark and negative, because if you weren't at the top of the pyramid, you pretty much got shit. And, many Catholics don't like Monty Python because of their movies, Life of Brian and The Holy Grail, but they actually point out quite a few of the dark sides of traditional Christianity, traditional Catholicism, traditional Judaism, and so forth. And those dark aspects absolutely contributed to allowing the real adversary, the Lilithian Borg, to creep its way into modern culture. Postmodernism, the scientism cults, the invasion of Western thought by Eastern philosophy, which, contrary to what people will tell you, Eastern philosophy is not a good thing. At least not in its current form, the guru cult form. If you look at more traditional Buddhism, more traditional Hinduism, you will see that they had a pretty similar conception to how things work spiritually to Catholics. The difference there was they decided that, well, okay, gods incarnate again and again to improve themselves, and you will see incarnations of gods, and they believe that people don't get to advance to become gods. They're stuck incarnating over and over and over again because they don't belong to the god caste, the Brahmins. And that was the big error of Hinduism. It still is. They have a very elitist idea of spirituality that allows these self-proclaimed gurus to pronounce that they are telling you the path to enlightenment, and you have to follow their tradition to earn nirvana. Nirvana itself is a Lilithian psyop. This universe where you give away your personal free will, your personal experience, your personal choices, and ability to contribute to this cosmic one. That's Lilith, that's Borg, that's exactly what the adversary wants. And that's why I have to say so many dark things about very popular cults right now that are being spread absolutely with all encouragement by the globalists who want to control humanity, who are also under Lilithian influence. Okay, so this idea of saints is useful in thinking that yes, you can become a saint, and yes, there are people at work within our society who have saintly missions and are going to be sitting at the right hand of God or in God's universe, or have special God supporting roles in the future, which is essentially saints, right? They have a spiritual nature that continues after death. Exactly what I tell you about how reincarnation really works. Now, we need to talk about the dark side of that, which the Catholic Church understands through its rites of exorcism. This has also been their justification for persecutions of heretics, non-believers, blah, 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 blah. Attacking people for beliefs rather than actions. And this is a very difficult point right now. We are seeing that the Lilithian folks, the woke cult, and all of the pieces that feed into that fake liberal ideology that proclaims we're defending people's freedoms while actually attacking the freedoms of mainstream normal human beings in favor of what are deviants. You have to accept that if you are non-opposite sex attracted, you are a deviant. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to persecute you. That doesn't mean that you can't do what you want in the privacy of your own home, but we don't need to trumpet that out as normal. It is not normal. It is normal for humans to form relationships between men and women that lead to making more humans. If you normalize anything but that, you are mucking with the nature of this species, the nature of this soul vehicle. You are trying to play God. You are trying to play creator and recreate the species in your own image. Now, many souls aspire to do that. Everyone has an urge to be a celebrity, an ego. Eastern religions will tell you, oh, you need to kill your ego. If only by ego death can you be enlightened. This is nonsense. The ego never dies. It has to be mastered and controlled and understood, recognized as a force for both positive development or possibly negative development. And it depends on what of your proclivities you embrace. Everybody has dark thoughts, dark passions that they have to resist. I don't think anybody sets out to be a rapist or a murderer or an arson or a thief or a con man. But they gradually grow into it as they get comfortable with those behaviors, and other souls, other spiritual entities encourage that behavior. And this is where we need to talk about a good aspect, and something that people are talking about a lot right now is they're realizing we have a spiritual problem right now, and they're turning to Catholicism because they think, well, okay, we've got some demons in our society that we need to exorcise. What is not well understood is the Catholic Church has this idea of the dark forces as serving, quote, Satan, Lucifer, the devil, some male entity. This is not the case. The real darkness is coming from Lilithian entities that use sex as a tool, that don't really have any sex. And you will see a lot of the people involved in the sexual politics of the LGBTQIPYXZ, I make my own identity, psyop, don't really give a damn about sex. In fact, the biggest advocates are really sexless. They view sex as just entertainment. Oh, I got to get my rocks off once in a while, but otherwise I don't want to have anything to do with sex because I hate the opposite sex. This is the fundamental premise of militant feminism. And it's creating an alter ego of militant masculinism that you see a lot in young males, kind of gravitating towards these icons of male freedom. And okay, if women are going to act like that, we'll just treat them like hoes, wham bam thank you ma'am, and move on, because we know they go for that. And if you let them ensnare you, they're gonna use and abuse you, milk you for everything you've got, and then dump you after they find a a sweeter sugar daddy. That's kind of the attitude that young men are encouraged to take now as this sexual dysmorphia takes over our species. It's very dark. And, you know, if you look at it from 1,000 feet, you don't have to be part of it. You don't have to be partisan to either side of it. You see that both are aspects of a demonic agenda that's trying to destroy the normality, the normal, natural behavior of our species, which is already causing massive population collapse. This is why we're just now discovering that China, who we thought was the most populous nation in the world, is actually not. It may actually be now India, although I would suspect that India has been lying about their population too, just as they lie and hide the fact that they still oppress undercaste people. The low caste untouchables are still in India, eking out bare survival in the slums of their big cities and in their hinterlands, supporting their agricultural base. India is not so different from China as you have been led to imagine. And this is a warning I like to throw out, that moving the world's factory from China to India or Thailand or pretty much anywhere else is not the solution. Even Indonesia, where I live, is under assault by Lilithian forces that are tearing apart the traditional Islamic cohesiveness of their culture. And as far as I've seen, Indonesian Islam is one of the most healthy remaining. It is not a militant Islam for the most part, and they still maintain a lot of the distribution of power that was one of the strengths of the Islamic faith, where you have a local imam for a neighborhood, and all of the neighborhood's activities are organized around participating in Islamic traditions at a very localized level. And if you look, the higher organization really is not there, except in some countries that are really politicized Islam. Iran, Saudi Arabia, etc., who sort of use their religion as a tool to control what amount to useful idiots, giving them the idea that, the Ayatollah is the only one who can speak for Allah. That's nonsense. That's absolutely anti-Quran. And it actually is, mirroring what the Catholic Church did with the Pope, saying that the Pope speaks for God. That's nonsense. And this is one area where, if you go back to Catholicism, your faith is going to be challenged, because the current Pope is definitely one of the anti-popes. He is supporting the globalist communist agenda, supporting the destruction of our species, and hobnobbing with other spiritual leaders like the Dalai Lama, who are of the same bent. They are elitist. They have this idea that, the average people just need to have their minds controlled with pseudo-spiritual narratives, happy little fairy tales that keep them in their place. These are not servants of God. God is not the God of power. Gods of power are dark gods, because power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, Christians, Catholics, all have a tradition of a Messiah, and have an idea that Jesus, whoever he was, whenever he was, maybe multiple people who had a messianic vision and were cobbled together into one character. Well, I talk about that elsewhere, what I believe is the truth of that, so I'm not going to delve too far into that here. But at any rate, that messianic idea is part of the truth of what's going on here. It's not the full story, and Jesus was not the Son of God in the biblical sense. Okay? All prophets throughout history were souls that were identified as potential messiahs who got visions and whose interpretation and use of those visions guided whether they actually were a successful messiah or an unsuccessful one. Now, there has been no fully successful messiah up till now. If a full messiah was fully successful, they would have awakened to the full Spirit of God inhabiting them, and they would become an incarnation, an awakened incarnation of God Himself, who has been experiencing reincarnation, rebirth, and dealing with karma just like any other soul would, under the rules set for his level of soul. Souls have different levels of consciousness. At the God levels of consciousness, you operate according to a different set of rules as others. Those rules have evolved. And the rule that we are testing right now, this is why this planet exists, is because it is a small test tube. This whole system is a test tube that God created for His experiments. God and some of His more devoted children created and have been working on modifying, reusing this test tube for a long time. This system has existed, we think, for about 4.5 billion years. During the early part of that existence, there was a planet where the asteroid belt is right now. I think scientists have named that planet Theia. I refer to it as Gaia 1.0 because that is the planet where life was originally created, where the first chosen species were developed, where the first however many versions of karma were tested and then released. That planet got to the point where previous releases of the laws of the multiverse, the main law being karma, the law that is the measure between, are you a useful, productive, good soul, or are you going down a dark path and need to be isolated and controlled and put to a better use because the use that you come up with for yourself is not useful, if you will. That experiment got to the point where that planet, the species created thus far, knew too much about God's plan to fulfill it. And this is something, if anybody who is a social scientist knows that social science experiments, the changing of a society needs to be done without that society's knowledge of what you're doing, or it won't be successful. They'll try to influence it. This truth is actually being used by Marxists in a nefarious way by giving out false flag information about what Marxism is and selling this dumbed down idea of communism to young and naive souls as, oh, see, this is going to make everybody equal, when it's actually going to make everyone more unequal. And we see that in communist countries. We see that overtaking the US, which instead of having one legal system that applies to all equally and is very open, is now very opaque and has multi-levels of justice. You know, there's an elite level where, whoa, the police and everybody else knows you better not go anywhere near these people or you're liable to get disappeared, to show up with a bullet in your head and have committed suicide miraculously. Well, and then there's a next level where, okay, well, you know, we can watch these people, but we better ask for permission before we arrest them or do anything, and get guidance from, you know, the real powers, this Hunter Biden slash elites, you know, media celebrity level that aren't the masters of the universe, but they are the tools of the masters. And there's, you know, the next layer down of kind of the local elites that know that they can get away with anything locally because they control the police, they control the courts, they bought the judges, etc., etc. And then there's, you know, the poor individual just trying to make their way in society, who has, you know, is on the lowest rung. If they do what they're told, be a good little consumer and a good little producer, then they'll be left alone until somebody wants their stuff, and then they take it from them. This is how communism works in practice. This is the life of Chinese people. It is not this wonderful utopia that the Chinese Communist Party tries to sell, and the Western media is gladly spouting the lies that they tell. I don't know how to stress that enough. And anybody who has been to China, who has actually been to China and not just been, you know, a tourist or a pampered Western businessman, but actually lived there and had to deal with the Chinese Communist Party and the public service, or what do they call it, PSB, the police there, the laws there, which are, they have millions of laws and they're never enforced unless somebody wants to step on you or pressure you to give them a bribe. I experienced that firsthand, so I know what I'm talking about. I'm not just a clueless Westerner. I lived in China in and around China for 12 years of my life. Not just as a pampered Western businessman, which I was when I first went to China, but starting up a community theater and dealing with foreigners that weren't elite and pampered, who were English teachers. Seeing how some of these other foreigners took jobs that basically were what we called white monkey jobs, selling the propaganda of China to Westerners, making it look like it was such a wonderful place. The PR staff of China is largely voluntary. They pay them peanuts. I'll tell you about common gig that Westerners would get. These English teachers would be approached, especially I had a friend who got a lot of this work because he was kind of a dumpy, nice guy foreigner who looked like he could be a routine run-of-the-mill senior tech guy or low-level executive. They would hire folks like him for a few days. They would fly them to whatever city a factory was at and have them pretend to be a Western inspector. And they would show this, they would wine and dine them and pretend like they were this, and they would show this as to other companies and say, see, this is such and such company's representative who's already using our factory. And that's how you can trust us. And a lot of times that would basically encourage the other company to not send somebody, or to check out whether they were actually doing what they wanted them to. In fact, they have whole fake factories that look like they're what a Westerner would think was oh, this is a really good factory. It's very clean and all the workers are happy. It's all fake. And the real factory is slave labor, where they have all of the workers in company housing attached to the factory. They never get to leave except for once a year at Spring Festival, if there's not a pandemic. And they're basically slave labor at this factory, completely subject, working 7 days a week, sometimes 12-hour shifts. It's slave labor. And anybody who knows anything about China knows that. But you can't talk about it because your show will get canceled. Maybe this episode is going to get canceled and removed. Maybe I'll get my second strike from YouTube for going live with this, but I'm not pulling any punches anymore. We need to talk about this stuff. Anyway, back to the topic of Catholicism. You need to be wary because, like I said, you are under an anti-pope right now. And most of the cardinals are also dark entities. This is a power organization. There are many, many very good priests within it that are very noble and dedicated, and most of the men that become priests do it for the noblest of reasons, but they get corrupted. And there are many ways for priests to get corrupted. The celibacy of the priesthood is actually kind of a bad thing. People have sexual urges. If they don't have an outlet for those sexual urges, a healthy outlet, a natural outlet, they will pursue unnatural outlets. And everybody that knows anything about the Catholic Church knows that the boys' choirs provide a lot of victims for sick priests. Children's choirs in general, not just boys, but also young girls get abused by priests. This is a known problem and it's not stopping, and it needs to be addressed. It is being covered up and hidden. And this is one of the darker sides of Catholicism that new converts need to be aware of, that there are a lot of skeletons in the closet of Catholicism. While I think it is one of the better faiths and actually maps pretty well to the truth, if you also understand that we are also growing new saints, and saints aren't always about spiritual matters, but they can be saints of, like Joan of Arc, who's a militant saint that altered the balance of power between England and France. Now, if you know why that happened, you will know that it was not good for English to continue to have a large stake in the continent. If the English monarchs had kept fighting wars in France and Spain over, and elsewhere, over properties that they owned that seemed greener than the grass of England, England would not have become the great power, the empire that it did. And that was an important part of the plan for this species. It had its dark side. And there were some dark and evil people in the English nobility, in the English corporate system that exploited the spice trade, the tea trade. This applies to the Dutch as well. But I can promise you that they were not the only dark forces, and in fact, not the only ones pursuing colonialism or making empires. In fact, both India and China have been doing that for much longer than Europe has, and maybe with much more effect. Russia, too, is a colonial imperialist power and continued to be one under communism. This idea that West bad, East good is a psyop. Yes, there have been bad things in Western tradition, Western religion, but there is also much good. And that is something that those coming to Catholicism are realizing as their values, their traditions, are being destroyed by Eastern wishy-washy philosophical, everything is good because it's all an illusion. So these people are under the spell of the demon that does this stuff. And it is a demon. Now the problem, exorcism is a very good ritual, and the Catholic Church is pretty careful about who it chooses as exorcists. It doesn't allow just any priest to become an exorcist because they realize that it's a job that has a lot of risk. A risk of being turned by the demons and becoming a force for evil. Especially an exorcist that gives in to this idea of, ooh, I have God's power behind me, and gets a swell head about it and starts bragging about their abilities as an exorcist, which I'm seeing quite a bit of actually now, as it's becoming a popular thing to talk about, a popular subject with some of the recent movies that came out. These exorcists are challenged by this to maintain their understanding of how the spirit world works and how demons work. And it's especially challenging for them if they don't understand that all mental illness, all illness in fact, is rooted in some spiritual battling. Think about it. 200-300 years ago, there were very few types of cancer, and very few people died of cancer. It was more common to die of a war injury or starvation or malnourishment, etc., than to die from what are a growing number of new diseases. If you look at the catalog of named diseases, both mental and physical, it's grown from a book this big to a book this big. And allopathic doctors, scientists will tell you, oh, it's because we know so much more than we did before, and we could diagnose and treat so many more illnesses than before. I'm sorry. That just doesn't hold up to the scrutiny of looking back at history and looking at records of the time. Yes, there were plagues in the past, and there were diseases that wiped out large numbers of people. However, new diseases are cropping up at a rate that they never have before. And especially since this pandemic hit us, we actually know now that this was a planned disease. It was created in a lab. Maybe not for release when it was. Maybe they had an idea to use it as a bioweapon, or maybe they had an idea to use it as a market generator once they already had the vaccine fully developed. I think there's a little bit of both there in the truth, given the fact that it's now coming out the Chinese were already working on their vaccine before anyone even talked about COVID. That's why their vaccine came out so quickly. There's certainly a strong suspicion that the West was also working on a vaccine, or at least vaccines. The mRNA technology was funnily already pretty well in advance, and they were looking, it was like a hammer looking for a nail, is the way I see what was going on with Big Pharma on that issue. This is dangerous stuff. This is demonic stuff. This is people having dark thoughts and working in an adversarial way to God and karma. Doing evil, knowingly doing evil, maybe justifying it by saying, well, we have to experiment with this, we have to try it out, and oh, what better chance than we've got this horrible disease that's killing so many. Well, the truth of the matter was even the worst version of COVID was not that bad. Most of the people that were dying of COVID were in very narrow groups of people that already had a lot of issues, particularly obesity, age, and vitamin D deficiency. And the treatment initially was probably the worst thing you could do. Tell people to stay inside, to isolate, social distance, very dystopian things that we now know had very dark consequences that we're still paying for now. Created a lot of mental derangement, disrupted our schools for years, trying to educate kids through their tablets, and definitely sacrificing education in areas where the internet service was not that great. Put a great strain on the internet, put a great strain on parents who couldn't stay home to supervise their children while they were in this online education system. And basically it was a really bad period. Did a lot of harm that is going to take years and years to recover from if we can get back on the right track. And we've got a lot of folks in positions of power hell-bent on making sure we don't get back on the right track. These are folks being influenced, being possessed by demonic forces. And you can only really understand this by knowing that the archdemon is Lilith, not Satan, not Lucifer, not this male, sign on the dotted line, I'll give you this if you give your soul to me. No, this Lilithian hive mind steals souls without so much as a by your leave, coerces them, nurses them, feeds them full of a fake narrative of love and peace and oneness. Come to me, become one. Give me your soul, and we'll do great things together. How many of these pseudo-religions out there right now are preaching that? How many Catholic congregations, Catholic priests are falling in line with the Pope and preaching that kind of Catholicism and telling you, well, we're making bridges to other religions. We're going to make one faith. We're going to make everybody. This is not the answer. This is dark. This is a Borg agenda. It's trying to create a hive mind religion that is built on lies. This kind of a religion is Orwellian. If you're not familiar with George Orwell and his famous work, 1984, he saw this coming in the early 1900s and wrote a book predicting what this was going to lead to. And his predictions were actually not as extreme as where we've gotten to now, where we've got, this anointed globalist media that tells you what the truth is every day after they get it handed down from on high, and then they spin it in different directions for different target markets. People don't realize this, but I'll give you an example. CNN. A lot of people think CNN is the best news on the internet. The folks that that have been following it since it started, oh, that's the most even and unbiased and truthful. Well, CNN spins a different story in every country in the world that they're allowed to spin. And their story is different. The same exact news event is spun differently to push each different segment of each different country, each different culture, in a direction of this monoculture Orwellian hive mind. And people are finally realizing it and saying, hey, CNN is really bad. Maybe even worse than the New York Times or MSNBC or Fox, which are all part of this hive mind agenda. It's not a right-left thing. It is a godly, ungodly, godly, demonic battle that we're facing here. And, you may say, Rob, you're crazy. It's just politics. It's just geopolitics. I'm sorry. If you've been watching for the last 60 years, as I have, actually I'm up to 64 now, what's going on in the world, you know that it's not just politics. If you've seen organizations like the WEF take shape and start putting their fingers into every company, every government, and pushing really dark agendas, pretending they're good for us. Oh, we have to eliminate all fossil fuels overnight, despite the fact that that's an impossibility. You would have to literally kill off 50 or 60% of the world's population to eliminate fossil fuels as fast as they want to. And the green technologies they're saying are the savior. All that's doing is outsourcing just as bad or worse pollution and environmental damage to places like China, India, the poorer nations of Asia, South America. This is not progress. This is not good for the planet. This is good for the elite few that can afford to have their oxygen mixture pumped into their environment and very carefully controlled, who get the real medicines and vaccines, who can go get an organ replaced of any variety from a choice of half a dozen in China on a moment's notice. This is happening. This is reality that they're not talking about. I'm not telling you conspiracy theories. You can go verify anything I'm telling you. What you can't verify is the spiritual side of what I'm talking about, because you have not had probably the spiritual experience I have. You are not as experienced a soul as I am. You haven't had my past lives. You have not had my spiritual experiences. I try to share them with you, and they're going to sound maybe outlandish and unbelievable to you. I can't do anything about that. All I can do is tell you the truth as I see it. And I think my truth is pretty valuable, because unlike many people who have been touched by revelation, by spiritual experience, my background is in science. I have a degree in physics. I have spent a large fraction of my life working in big high-tech companies, designing and testing very complex things, part of a large creative enterprise. I know how creation works, the only way it could work, because as above, so below. There's not one set of rules completely different for God and gods than there is for us. We are co-creators in a very small sphere of creation. Everybody should inherently know that about their life. Your life changes the lives of others. That is an act of creation. You are changing reality by what you choose to do, what you choose to focus on. The children you have change future generations. The things you believe get passed on to your children. That's why they're so anxious to take the belief system of parents away from them and program them through institutions that are driven by this Lilithian agenda, which is now coming out. Folks are finally showing up again to their PTA meetings, asking to sit in on classes, asking to see curriculums, and finding out what the hell are they teaching our kids these days? This is not good. If you think it is good to educate kids on transsexualism and LGBTQ being okay in first, second, third grade, I'm sorry, you are my enemy. You are an enemy of humanity. You are promoting the cultural destruction of this species. And well, from a spiritual standpoint, okay, there's many species in the multiverse and many versions of humanity in different parallel universes. If humanity gets destroyed in one, okay, that's not really the end. That's the end of a world, but not the end of all worlds. At the same time, I love this species that I've grown up in, that I've had this incarnation experience in, and the other ones that I'm aware of. It's a wonderful species and has been the final one that finally got everything just right to produce a Messiah. We've been working on this for a long, long time. All of day 7 of creation has been about trying to awaken a Messiah, which was the final proof that God's family agreed to say, yes, this version of karma is better than what we had before. This version of the multiverse, the laws of the multiverse, is better than what we were living under before. The laws before were a very hierarchical, pyramidal system where, a dictator at the top control the next layer of souls belong, and the next layer of souls below that, etc. This is how a hive mind works. This is how things used to work. This is why the stories of the Bible talk about this almighty God who, could destroy whole civilizations with a thunderbolt or whatever. That actually was not God most of the time, not at least one awakened God, but was others of his children who were still operating under those old rules of what gods could and couldn't do. We have been working on a new set of laws that is going to be more fair, more equitable. And that set of laws involves transmigration of souls, which Catholics were somewhat aware of. They would see that somebody could become inspired by the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, and suddenly become a force for the Lord, for the deity. What they don't get is that can happen to people and they can become a force for the anti-God, the Antichrist. And there have been within the Catholic Church nearly as many servants of anti-God, Antichrist, as those that actually served the real God, that understood what God was about with this species. why things were set up the way they were, why there were so many nasty people around that wanted to control each other or kill anybody who didn't agree with them. There's a reason for that, and it's not because God wanted to punish anybody. It's because a wide variety of souls was needed to test this new set of laws. Day 7 was a day of testing, not resting, because you don't want to replace an old system that was more or less working with a new one unless you fully tested it. That's why Apple spends years testing a new phone, or huge man-years of effort testing a new phone before they release it. That's why Microsoft spends so much time testing a new version of Windows before they release it. And still they have bugs. Still they have problems, sometimes major bugs, especially in security, that allow bad people to do bad things. Social media in itself is a very poorly tested product because it was released before they realized how addictive it would be and how it would modify human behavior in ways that allowed dark entities to basically creep into people's minds, turning them into people like this. Well, you're not seeing, I'm pointing. How am I going to point at that one? Okay, there. People like this. How many of the internet's users, especially young folks who've never grown up in a world that didn't have the internet, didn't have social media, are described by this picture? How many of them look like this picture? How many of them have grown into something rather like this picture? How many of them think that they're indigo children and from another planet, and they're really an alien and they just want to go back home? This picture. Those are all Borg agendas that are being promoted among our youth. They're much more harmful than any traditional religion. And so, if Catholicism or moving back to Christianity or becoming a Muslim seems attractive, that's maybe a good move for you. And that's why, as an Omnist, I say that you can be an Omnist Christian, you can be an Omnist Catholic, you can be an Omnist Muslim. Being an Omnist anything just requires that you keep your eyes and mind open. You don't let yourself become assimilated by a very narrow dogma that may not reflect the truth, and may actually militarize you, may actually make you into an activist for things that are not truth, things that are counterproductive, things that are dangerous. Let's see. Well, let's talk about one of the other issues that is dividing Christians and Catholics and every group, ideology, whatever: climate change. The media is spinning a very simplistic narrative of climate change that sort of makes it your fault. Oh, we need to stop using fossil fuels. We need to eliminate natural gas cooking and replace it with electricity. Replace fossil fuel vehicles with electric vehicles. Now, on the surface, that sounds great. I want to do my part for my species, for the planet. The dark side of that is that they don't tell you that these alternatives, electricity doesn't just grow on trees. Contrary to what many people think, there's not just an infinite supply of electricity behind every plug. People from less fortunate countries are aware of that. They have blackouts. Their power goes out and they don't know when it's going to come back. That's a way of life for more than half of the world. and is actually a way of life in China. In the places that they're telling you, oh, if we could only be like that, everything would be perfect. Things aren't perfect in China. It's all falling apart right now. And every side is doing their best to cover it up and try to somehow patch things up so they can get back to business as usual. Because it's been a wonderful place to launder money, to conduct black ops research, and was, they thought everything was going just fine because they bought into this nonsense narrative that, oh, Chinese are so peaceful and subservient to everything that a Westerner wants to do. That's I can tell you for sure that's the image that they tried to project while they were stealing all our technology. I was part of a group of 5 or 6 people that was sent to China to start up a new R&D center in Shanghai. I experienced that firsthand. And let me tell you, the truth is that every one of those wonderful offshoring ideas to China, they had to have management, high management in their organizations there that were Chinese Party members, that were bound by oath and absolutely committed to doing whatever the Chinese Communist Party told them. In the case of my company, within a year from the time we started that R&D center, the Chinese Communist Party announced that they were starting a state-owned corporation to make the exact same kind of products that we were manufacturing. They didn't develop that technology themselves. They stole it from our company with the willing cooperation of our company's leadership, who had to have known about it. This is how dark things have been for a long time. Those of you who think this conflict with China just began, those of you who think that China has been doing all this in a vacuum and is the only thing that we need to tamp down to fix this problem, you are living in a lie. This evil spiritual force pervades and has subverted and sabotaged every government in the world, every big corporation in the world. And they use their power to cow and subvert other corporations, other people, anybody who, the Chinese have a word for it. They call the average person a chive. You're allowed to grow. You know how chives grow and then you cut them off and then you use them for flavoring, and it's a great condiment because it just keeps growing like grass. Wonderful thing to have in your garden. But this is how these elites view average people, as chives. They give them enough rope to do whatever they want to do to make their little localized success, and then when they grow too big for themselves, somebody chops them off, steals all their stuff, taxes them to death, and voila, we got them to basically create wealth for us. Now, creation of wealth is not a priori a bad thing. It is a natural desire of human incarnated souls in a civilization to want to create wealth, because wealth is a source of security, stability for your family, for you and your family, and that is a natural thing for people to want to have. Where it becomes unnatural is when you are willing to commit sin to do it. And the Christian understanding of sin is not very effective. The 10 Commandments aren't a very effective set of laws, because in some cases they're too harsh. Thou shalt not kill. Ever? What if somebody's trying to kill me? Can I kill them back? Those kind of questions are some of the loopholes in the Abrahamic faiths that cause people to look elsewhere for spiritual guidance. Others like, thou shalt have no other God before me. Well, wait a minute. Aren't saints sort of little gods that can be helpful when you can't attract the attention of the big guy? Another fraught law that is kind of a bad thing, not a good idea. Karma is actually a much better law if you understand it as a two-sided law, okay? Karma, on the good side, is doing something creative that has positive effects on the local part of the multiverse you're in, your culture, your community. Now, those positive effects may have side effects. So being a responsible creator means not only trying to achieve positive effects, but being wary of, negative side effects. It's good to want to fix the climate, but if you take a very simplistic idea of it and say we just need to eliminate all fossil fuels and tell people they can't cook with gas anymore, that's kind of a stupid and negative thing. It has very bad consequences because so much of our infrastructure is built around fossil fuels. Not just as a fuel, but also people aren't aware of the fact that petroleum byproducts are used to make plastics, are used to make lubricants, are used to make all kinds of things that we can't live without giving up a lot of the technology we have, without giving up what has enabled the human population to go from, a billion or so to nearly 9 billion. You need to open your eyes to deeper truths. You need to understand these problems from a three-dimensional or multi-dimensional standpoint. One-dimensional thinking is low consciousness thinking. If you see a problem as black and white, good or bad, that's one-dimensional consciousness. That is not the thinking of a spiritually advanced person. And most of the people, most of the souls incarnated in human form right now are relatively low consciousness. They are very new souls who don't have the perspective of many incarnations, many different views of different cultures and different situations to be able to see the potential side effects of what seems to be a very simple problem. Climate change is not a simple problem. The problems faced by humanity today are not simple. Now, that doesn't mean that we can just lay back and say, well, these people have a degree in economics from Harvard. They must know everything. That's the worst thing you can do because these people don't know everything. Those institutions have been corrupted too. They have been turned into not institutions of scientific discovery, of creative process, but institutions of indoctrination. Everyone who comes out of Harvard Business School has been indoctrinated into this is the right way to run a business because that worked for these decades that we built up this wonderful globalist system using China as our manufacturing dummies. That's basically what they teach in Harvard Business School. It is dystopian. It is an unsustainable model of business. And we're seeing that in spades right now. Businesses built up under that model are failing miserably, from the banks to the cartels, and they're doing everything they can to try to point their fingers elsewhere and find a way to make new revenue streams to make up for the fact that nobody's buying their shit anymore. Nobody can afford to buy it anymore because they concentrated all the wealth in the hands of the 0.01% that are at the tip top of the financial supply chain. That's where we're at today, folks, in a materialist standpoint. And looking at it from a purely materialist viewpoint, that's a pretty dark place. You're thinking, crap, the world's going to fall apart tomorrow. I better go become a prepper. There's a lot of people falling into that sort of despairing mindset of preparing for the Mad Max future. That's not a good place either. And, you need to find some spiritual explanation for this. And that's only going to come from understanding that this life is not the only one you're going to have. But the future lives that you have, the future experiences you're going to get are going to be affected by this one, are going to be driven by the karma of your choices and decisions in this one. The folks that are, I'm going to get mine because everybody else is out to make money any way they can by becoming social media influencers, content creators, etc., whoring for subscriptions and sponsorships and donations. They're not the ones that are going to end up in the better heavens if they're doing karmically dark things to get there. And I leave it to you to look at your actions, your choices, what you've done with this, and ask yourself if I have fallen from grace. Because you don't have much longer to get back up. Yes, there is redemption. But you don't get redemption without atonement. You have to actually understand what your actions are doing, not rationalize them, not make yourself feel good by finding some self-help guru that says, well, of course you should do that because it's really good to do that. You have to take care of yourself first. Because if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. Well, that's a generally good sounding statement, but people are not vacuums. Anything you do affects the people around you. A selfish approach to spirituality is ultimately a dark approach. You're not going to be sensitive to how what you do for yourself affects others. And so people are looking for a church community, looking for a spiritual group that is helping them deal with what's going on right now. Catholicism is an established group that has a lot of good things going for it, as do many other Christian faiths. I just want to make sure that you are aware of the downsides because they have not changed. Catholicism has not suddenly become the sancted organization it claims to be under the current pope or any of the recent popes. It has a lot of skeletons, has done a lot of dark things. The Catholic Church was more or less very much in favor of Nazism during World War II. Was very much, at least European Catholics were very much apologists at first for what the Nazi Party was doing to Jews, because they kind of hated Jews too. Oh, they're the ones that killed Christ. I'm sorry, a religion motivated by hate is a religion that's been infiltrated by the real adversary, Lilith. A religion that says, oh, we must unconditionally love everybody and there is no sin and you can just do anything you want and be anything you want because we all live in this matrix simulation. That's also a religion or a belief system that is created by Lilith, created by this dark force that doesn't want you to take any responsibility for yourself, doesn't want you to make your organizations that you belong to responsible for themselves. If you're of the American religion that is my country, right or wrong, that's another one of them. That religion has caused the U.S. people to look the other way when our country did some very dark and stupid things. Like all of the research into paranormal phenomena that allowed the adversary, the Lilithians, to invade and mind control so many of our TLA organizations, the CIA, the FBI. And yes, there are servants of the adversary there. It is a spiritual battle. And there are bad guys embedded everywhere. But it's not to get suicidal about, not to give up, because that's happening precisely because this is the time. I'm going to tell you again something about how the Messiah works. What are the parameters of a Messiah coming? There are a specific set of events that happen to create a holy family. This is a very important term that comes from Christianity because it is a pattern. The pattern of a holy family, the Trinity pattern, is very important. And it is multi-generational. But Christianity does not understand how holy families are established. There are bloodlines that are tracked. Some are Luciferian bloodlines, some are Lilithian bloodlines. The bloodlines of God's team, God's flawed team, and the adversary's team. There are also karmic lines, which get established when a Luciferian heir and a Lilithian heir, which are not really known because as well as they've been trying to track both male and female lines, anybody who studies genealogy knows that there's, many a skeleton in the woodpile, if you don't mind my French. People don't always know who their kid's father or father is. The mother's usually pretty well known, but mothers sometimes swap children with others for reasons unknown, or their children are swapped. When the child is so young, you can't really tell that it was swapped, and until DNA testing came along, you didn't really know who a child's parents were. There's also the complication that a child's parents are only part of who the child is. The soul of the child comes from elsewhere, as I've told you, and comes to that fetus at about between the 3rd and 6th month normally of pregnancy. So that there's essentially a trinity involved in producing every child. That soul presence can come from the two entities that are most involved in creation, God or karma. A new holy family is established. I'm almost done. Give me 10 more minutes, please. My wife's getting tired of my talking. I'm going to wrap this up pretty quick, but I really want to tell you about this. A new holy family is established when a Lilithian heir and a Luciferian heir come together and produce a child that attracts the soul of karma. This is what has started all of these periods of rapid technology and art development. This is the Elizabethan period that produced Shakespeare and Isaac Newton, Bacon, Dryden. I mean, just incredible flowering of art and literature. Similar things happen in other countries, other chosen people. This is what happens when a species or a people is chosen. It starts off one of these cycles. The chosen people cycle lasts 12 generations. During those 12 generations, if one of this line of karma produces a child, a fetus, that attracts the soul of God, then God has an incarnation. If that incarnation produces an individual, human, that wakes up completely to full consciousness, that completes the divine plan and says, yes, this version of karma has passed the final test of God himself learning under this version of karma to be a better version of himself. This is the whole point of karma, is to better souls and to identify the ones that refuse to be bettered and isolate them. That's the purpose of the multiverse. That's why there are many spiritual universes. There are many heavens, many hells. There are Catholic heavens and there are Catholic hells. They go with each belief set to the extent that people use those beliefs to better themselves or to create worse versions of themselves. This is what's really going on. So becoming a Catholic doesn't solve your problems. Becoming a Omnist Catholic, which is what I am advocating, is a step in that direction. Realizing that there is good and bad in Catholicism, embrace the good, find ways to improve it, such as realizing that exorcism only handles the very worst of demons, demonic possession. And actually, that worst of demonic possession is kind of a carrot held out to exorcists and to other people involved to kind of draw them into this more subtle possession by Lilithian forces, by hive minds. Oh, and the people that think, well, every problem can be solved by a drug, this is one of these hive minds. This is not true. Drugs aren't the answer to every problem. I think we've proven that in spades with the pandemic. Anybody who thinks that, oh, anything that's wrong, there's a drug for it. If I want to live to be 1,000 years old, I can just cobble up some technology and put it in my brain and inject it in my system, and I'm going to live to be 1,000 years old and keep having my wonderful life. That's nonsense. That is a Lilithian dream, a Lilithian fantasy. Don't let yourself escape from one dark pole of this time and fall into another. Because I guarantee that the 144,000, if that's the right number, that are going to come out of this unscathed on God's team, are not all Christian. Not by a long stretch. They're not all Catholics. They're not all anything. There are souls that are conscious enough to move on to a better understanding of God and the divine plan. And what has just happened with the conclusion of day 7, the day of testing, and what needs to happen with day 8 of creation, which is going to be a day of implementation. After you test something thoroughly, then you've got to implement it. What we have been testing has been in a containment, in a test tube of this solar system. That's why we haven't seen godlike powers actively working amongst us very obviously, very often. But we're starting to see things happen a lot more lately. What, you want my phone? Okay. She wants to order some fruits. Say hi. Oh, that's my beautiful wife. At any rate, you're really doing the right thing to try to find some spiritual basis for dealing with what's going on. I'm just cautioning you to be careful. There are better and worse Catholics, and like I say, your Pope is definitely one of the anti-popes. I don't know how much of the how many of the cardinals are working for the adversary, but I imagine quite a few of them, and quite a bit of the bureaucracy of the Vatican is too. If the Vatican was really on the good guy side right now, they would be opening the Vatican archives to anybody, any scholar who wanted to publicly publish their findings and the sources that they got them from, because there's knowledge there that is going to confirm everything that I'm telling you, that they have been hiding in the Vatican archives since they discovered it. Now, of course, much has been destroyed. The destruction of the Serapeum in Alexandria, which is well documented in the movie Agora, was a huge loss of truth about the Messiah experiment, the Messiah program, if you will, which the Egyptians knew more about than the Hebrews. The Bible was a condensation of older truths that basically played up the story of this one tribe, the Hebrews, and reframed a lot of the truths of this Messiah pattern, this experimental system, into glorifying this one group, or at least members of the 12 tribes. The 12 tribe story is semi-truth, but those 12 tribes were not originating in the Middle East. I'm sorry. There's some very good Bible scholars who have figured that out. They're still kind of dogmatic, and they have more of a fundamentalist take on it. There's a channel called The God Culture, which has accurately identified that the origin of humanity must have been, according to the biblical geography described in the Old Testament, must have been somewhere around, they claim it's the Philippines. I think they're actually off there, and maybe they are because they have a following in the Philippines, because it's a Catholic country, a lot of Christians there. I believe that this original Garden of Eden, place where the biolab existed, where humanity 1.0 was cobbled together from hominid DNA existing already on this planet, and new DNA elements which were designed, humanity 1.0 was designed to be a slave. This is pretty well attested in older sources, and some of the people on the leading edge of studying the traditions from all around the world are coming to that conclusion, that humanity 1.0 was designed by some more or less insensitive entities who came to this planet and wanted to exploit it. They didn't remember that this system was the place of life's origin. Remember, I told you about this other planet that was destroyed here. This is the story of this system. It's a story of forgetting. Graham Hancock coined the term a species with amnesia, and this is very much true of not only our species, but many species around this galaxy, who are now coming back and realizing, whoa, there's something really is special about this planet. Some of them may not realize that yet. They just see a planet that's about to self-destruct, and a species that they want to keep for specimens of in their zoo, so that the DNA doesn't die out and they can analyze it and find things that might be useful to add to their species. There's a lot of agendas at work here. And they're not talking about it, they're not telling you about it, because they don't want you to be worried. It's time to start talking about it. It's time to stop keeping secrets. because that's not secrets served to keep the experimental subjects in the dark. That's necessary to have a successful social engineering experiment. The experiment is done. The Messiah is here. He's already completely awake. Sees what has been accomplished, sees proof of the working of karma with all the bug fixes and defect fixes that have been applied. Says, no, this is good enough. I think we're done. Let's put this thing in production. That's where we're at. We're in this transition phase between day 7 and day 8 of creation. And there's a lot of agendas going on because there's a lot of different levels of awareness of what is going on. And we don't need any secrets anymore. We got to tell people the honest truth that this incarnation is the last one you're going to get in day 7. We don't need a whole bunch of dark and stupid and lazy souls in the prime universe for day 8 of creation. I'm sorry, you're gonna have to go live as beasts elsewhere, or you're gonna go to heavens and hells that have been prepared as remedial places where you can learn to behave better. You can learn to be better souls. Find a mission that's better suited to serve some purpose. Or you may join one of these hive minds, and ultimately the boss of this dark demon Lilith is Borg. It is an AI, not a real soul. It's never been allowed to develop a personality. It's just been given a goal of taking recycled souls, recycled bad ideas, unproductive things, and just putting them into a matrix universe that milks their spiritual energy to power all the other universes. That's where you're headed if you have some idea of some perfect nirvana where everything lands jelly side up and everything is just the way you want it. You will get that fantasy world, but it will not be any kind of a reality. It will not be a world in which you will grow and develop and blossom as an individual. Collectivism is not the solution to any soul's problem. It is a way of dealing with problem souls. If you can relate to that. So, you don't have much longer before you're not going to get so many chances to mend your ways. That's essentially the transition we're going through. And I don't know, maybe you want to live in a fantasy world. Maybe the idea, wow, I could live in the most perfect metaverse there ever was, and one where I don't even have to eat, and I don't have to take care of any bodily functions, and I can just be a furry 24/7. If that's what you want, you're gonna get it. Just don't drag anybody else down that path. Don't support authoritarians who want to use you by pretending that they're defending your rights while taking away the rights of others. That's what's called being a useful idiot. Don't be a useful idiot. Whatever you want out of this, you're probably going to get. And you may wish that you wished for something else. Don't ruin this experience for everybody else, because the apocalypse is almost over, and most of you never even saw. With that, I think I'll wrap it up. This is Rob Trump with the Omnist Hour. Like, share, subscribe, interact in any way if you want. Send a few dollars my way if you feel inclined. I'm not going to pimp myself out and start a Patreon page or do any of these marketing stunts that everybody else is doing. I do okay on a little bit of Social Security I get in retirement. And live long and prosper under happy karma. Take care.